Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Risk Academy. Today we're going to talk about chapter number 6 in our Risk Academy. So we've moved on. Now we're getting into some of the nuts and bolts here. We're specifically going to talk about risk identification. Last chapter we talked about our assets. We found the things that had value to them. Now we actually need to identify our risks. This is a very important step in our risk management process. And we're going to talk about how you would go about doing that. You actually need to do some specific things to find these risks and be able to identify them. Because once you've identified them, then you naturally can look at how to handle them, which we'll talk about in later chapters. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, how do we identify risks? We're going to do something called risk modeling. This risk modeling is literally, it's a thought process. Maybe you've got several people in the room when you're going through this process, shooting things back and forth off each other, spitball session if you may. And you're going to talk about really 4 types of things in risk. And these risks and different types of, we talked about all these models and frameworks and all these other things we can use. They use a combination of any of these terms. So you kind of need to think of them. They're actually 4 separate things, but we'll talk. So the first one are threats. What threats are. Okay, we'll talk more about threats and threat modeling in a minute. Your vulnerabilities. What's your weaknesses? So the first is, who's going to attack us? The next one is vulnerabilities. The third one is how likelihood are they actually to attack us? And the last one is, if we did get attacked and something happened, what would be the impact to the business should that occur? So you literally need to do all of these. Now, these may be separate sessions if you're large, and maybe if you're very small, you can do this in an hour. But you actually need to think through all of these. And once you have all of that information together, we'll bring it all together at the end where we actually talk about putting it on something called a risk register. All right, so let's look at our threats first. We do something called threat modeling here. Literally, we're looking at our internal threats and our external threats because they are different. When I think of internal, you're thinking of things internal to your organization. Both of these, by the way, you need to look at them from all these different angles. The very first one, always and forever, we need to look at our people. In healthcare, people are your largest source of breaches. Think about this. If you're faxing medical records, for example, and you fax them to Joe's Body Shop instead of faxing them to another medical practice or a facility, your person there, the people made the mistake. And in healthcare, people are the largest source of breaches that we have. So you first need to look at people, both external, what people externally. Think of your physical security. What happens if we're trying to get into this building, where your office is at? People trying to get in there, people trying to steal your laptops, both internal and external forces. Your people, anything technical, the technical things that you have. Your laptops, they're a threat because they're not encrypted, for example. Technological, we don't have battery backups on our equipment or our desktop machines. Anything like that. So you're looking for technical, obviously your people. Maybe you've got some administrative issues. Think about in terms of, all right, so we don't have a policy, an HR policy that covers a specific act that someone's doing. Maybe we don't have all of our acceptable use policies correct, for example. Or maybe that, we have issues that we don't know about, like there's a new regulation that you aren't aware of that you just became aware of, and you don't have anything written on how to cover it. The Medicare repayment rule, are you complying with that? So maybe there's some administrative paperwork that needs to be done as well. It's also a threat. So you need to literally look at it from internal point of view and from external people coming at you. Okay, and typically when everyone thinks of cybersecurity, they're only thinking about externally in tech. they're talking about someone hacked me, someone got in, ransomware. That's always an external threat that happened by tech. And by the way, most of the time when it happens, that happened because an internal person clicked on a social engineering attempt, whether it was a phishing email or they went to a particular website and wasn't paying attention. But that, again, sometimes they're tied together. But you need to look at them from all ways. And it's literally, you have to have a session, sit down session, clear your mind, and start thinking of how can people attack me. All right, so we talked about our threats. Now talk about some vulnerabilities. And there are some ways to identify vulnerabilities. What is a vulnerability? A vulnerability is a weakness in your systems, not just systems, in your people. Again, remember, we're talking about risk, so we're talking about corporate risk. I always explain risk is a pie. Your information or IT risks are a slice of the pie, but they're not everything. So we're looking for our vulnerabilities or our weaknesses as a corporation. So technically you can do things with scans. They'll give you a bunch of technical information and technical things to fix. And these are great, by the way. I highly recommend them. You also have people weaknesses. So, maybe you do a skill set inventory and you find out, we really need to have this type of clinician come in and help us, or maybe we need to do this instead, or maybe we've got some people that are doing some things that are kind of not what we want, so you've got to address it. Maybe you need to train them, maybe you might need to replace them. So you've got to look at your people as well. Maybe there's a legal or regulatory piece that you're vulnerable in. So you're doing something, but maybe you're not doing it as well as you should be. HIPAA, by the way, falls under that category. How well are you complying with HIPAA directly falls under legal or regulatory. If you have no idea how you're doing under HIPAA, that is a big vulnerability. Just tell you right now. Maybe there's some financial pressures on your corporation. That's a vulnerability as well. You look at this as a risk. A risk may be that we aren't making enough income, or where our expenditures are more than they should be. There's financial things for you to look at there. But literally, vulnerability, you're looking to highlight your weaknesses. Find where you're weak at. All right, so we've gone through our threats, vulnerabilities. We talked about the likelihood and impact. Those are pretty straightforward. So now we need to do something and rate our risk. So we've got all these, we've thought about all these different things. You literally need to rate your risk. And for example, it could be that our laptops are not encrypted, and because we travel and we're mobile, they're a theft item. You literally do something called a risk matrix to be able to rate them. I've drawn an example of one up here, but there are multiple different kinds of risk matrix you can use. In fact, those models or frameworks that we talk about all will have a matrix for you to use to rate your risk on. And I have it here where it's a, critical to the business, severe, normal, or low, and then an impact if it's gone, rated from 1 to 4. So if you had something that's critical and was very high impact to your organization, if it's gone, that might be, maybe you're doing this and multiplying or adding them, I will say adding them together. Maybe that's that one gives you an 8. Where if you have, maybe your public website is unavailable, down here, it's low to your organization and it doesn't have very big impact. All right? Then you get down, and that may be a 1. What we're trying to do here is use a risk matrix to give you a way to rank and rate these risks. We want to prioritize these. What we're trying to do is literally, so you know that the things that have the highest impact and are the most critical to your business are the ones that you address first, obviously. So once we kind of work our way through the these, and again, you rate each individual risk according to this. So then you have to come out and you prioritize them. So, all right, now I've got my prioritization list. Well, what do you actually do with that? There is something called a risk register that you would put these in. It's literally, you take and put them, you can put them on an Excel spreadsheet, you can put them on a Word document, you can buy a fancy product that'll do that. You take them and put them on that risk register, and you prioritize them on that risk register by your values. You may determine, maybe you like using these numbers to rate your risk, 1 to 8. It's a level 8 risk, it's a level 1 risk. Maybe you like the terms low, medium, and high. And you determine that these are all highs, these up here are all mediums, and those are lows. However you decide, because you decide that for your organization. But you give this and prioritize them, and then you get them on that risk register. And that, folks, by the way, this looking at each individual risk and doing this, that is part of our risk management process. Inside of that, we talked about a risk analysis. That's what we just did. This risk analysis is literally doing all of this. So this is where we rate our risks so then we can work on them. You know, as in the healthcare, once you identify things that are out of the ordinary or could be have some sort of impact on the patient, and the likelihood that it will happen and the impact it would happen, think of like if you're doing a falls assessment on an elderly patient. So we actually analyze each risk, and that's what we're doing. What was our threats, vulnerabilities? We found a risk. Okay, we think that. All right, let's figure out and put it on the matrix. Oh, great, we'll be able to prioritize it on our risk register, and then that process goes round and round and round again. But once you've found them and identified them, then you can work on them. Just like anything else in business, you find a place you're weak, you figure out how to fix it, you fix it, and you move on. All right, so thank you for coming today. We've talked about how to identify risks. We've talked about terms of your threat modeling, your vulnerability modeling, finding the threats, the vulnerabilities, the likelihood that it'll happen, the impact if it does happen. Then we've talked about how to actually that risk analysis part of the risk management process, where you literally rate them using something called a risk matrix. You prioritize them once you've got that rating done, and then you put them on this risk register, which is literally just, I look at it as a to-do list, and it's a prioritized to-do list. We got to fix this, we got to fix that, we got to fix that. Till you get down to the point where like, I'm not worried about that, we'll just accept that. So thank you for coming, and welcome, and I hope to see you back for Chapter 7.